Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. April is history.
Bye, April.
And today, so are we.
We'll hear about Pioneer Valley History Fest happening this weekend at Westfield State.
And we'll hear about history in the making via the U.S. State Department's Cultural Affairs Office when we learn about the International Artists in Residency coming to Florence on Sunday.
As part of OneBeat. But since it's May Day, we'll learn a little local labor history. At Swords Point is a radio documentary that we will broadcast here on 88.5 NEPM this Saturday, May 4th at noon, and again on Sunday, May 5th at 3 p.m. It tells the story of a pivotal moment in American history when the power of Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare found its first true target, and when the dismantling of American organized labor began. This is the story of a rural town where, against all expectations, the workers fought back.
And that rural town is Greenfield, Massachusetts. This hour-long radio documentary recounts these labor struggles during the 1950s while also giving context on the machine tool industry of Greenfield, once a center of global innovation, as well as the origins of the United Electrical Workers Union, or UE. Joining us are the creators of the documentary, Tom Goldscheider and Ian Koss.
Tom Goldscheider is a public historian and working farrier. He has a master's in history from UMass Amherst. His research on Greenfield's labor history was published in the Historical Journal of Massachusetts. He's also published and spoken on the origins and significance of Shays' Rebellion and developed an interactive curriculum on local abolitionist history for the David Ruggles Center for History and Education.
Ian Koss is a creator of acclaimed podcasts. His 9-part documentary, The Big Dig, was named one of the best podcasts of 2023 by The New Yorker and Vulture. Spent over 6 weeks on the top 100 shows on Apple Podcasts. And am I allowed to say that I believe you were nominated for a Peabody?
I spilled the beans, Ian. I'm sorry.
That is public knowledge.
It was also beans spilt in the lobby that you are father and son, which is not completely evident in the listening to this At Swords Point radio documentary, but it's a very fascinating listen for people who love local history. And Tom Goldscheider, the father, and Ian Koss, the son, who are both co-producers of this documentary, join us this International Labor Day.
So glad to be here.
Was that fact
Likewise.
actually important in the creation of this documentary, the fact that you were father and son?
Well, it wouldn't have happened.
If you got a guy getting Peabodys and on the top 100 of Apple Podcasts want to do a radio documentary with you and happens to be your son, there
Exactly.
you go. Uh-huh.
Fair enough.
I always say Ian taught me everything I know.
That's awfully
And
sweet.
vice versa. Yeah, I mean, this was a story that, Tom had done the research for this a few years ago and published it in a historical journal. But the story just felt so rich and like it deserved to be told in a different format and reach a different kind of audience. And I think as we got into, talking about it more, we realized there's a lot of archival audio to draw from labor organizers in the 1950s, that there were chances to do some original interviews with, people in Greenfield today that, it felt like this was a really interesting way to bring this story to a different kind of audience.
Well, let's tell a little bit of the story. I love that it's called At Swords Point and how the still functioning Greenfield Garden Cinema is the focal point at the beginning of this documentary and where it gets the name. Tell us why it's called At Swords Point.
I actually sort of stumbled onto this story. I mean, I had this background in history. I got a master's at UMass. And then I was walking the picket line in Greenfield Hospital where the nurses were on strike, and my wife is very active there. And I met a couple of retired union organizers in town who told me about this chapter of history in Greenfield in the 1940s and 1950s that I had no idea about. So this is a long way of answering your question, which is that I gained access to the papers for the UE Local 274 located in Greenfield. Then it was above Snow's Ice Cream. And I found the pictures from the Greenfield Recorder, and one of them pictured the workers at a strike vote underneath the marquee for the Garden Theater, where they happened to be showing the movie At Swords Point.
Which is sort of like a Three Musketeers-esque movie, I gather.
Swashbuckling.
Yeah.
Yes, that was a thing.
I kind of want to see the movie now. The UE, the Electrical Workers Union that is at the center of this, were organizing what was called Greenfield Tap and Die. People might have heard that before. If you're from Franklin County, it's something that you almost certainly have heard of. But if people aren't familiar with the import of Greenfield Tap and Die, tell us why that was so pivotal, not just to Greenfield, but really the world.
Yes. Well, Greenfield was the tap and die center of the universe, self-proclaimed, but it produced more than half the world's taps and dies.
And taps and dies are what make nuts and bolts. In a nutshell, right? Taps make the bolts and dies make the nuts. Is that right? No.
No, it's the
dies
other
make
way
the bolts
around.
and taps make the nuts. I always forget that.
It's screw thread technology.
Yes.
Right.
And it's absolutely central to the industrial process. Everybody depends on these tools. And it was an international company. I mean, it dominated the industry worldwide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no matter where nuts and bolts were being used, most of them had some connection to Greenfield, Massachusetts.
Yes, not so much nuts and bolts per se, but the taps and dies,
Right.
the tools that make nuts and bolts.
Uh-huh.
And this was really eye-opening for me as somebody who's not especially mechanically inclined. But like once you start looking for threaded things, like look at the microphone that you're talking into.
Right.
Think of all the threads on that. Look at the light bulb on the wall. There's threads on that. Look at the fire hydrant on the side of the street. There are threads in that. The watch on your wrist. Like there's so many things that are built on the idea that two parts can screw into each other and hold together and then be unscrewed and come apart. It's such a fundamental technology to all the technology we use.
But it seems kind of not necessarily intuitive that technology and that industry would be a part of the United Electrical Workers Union as opposed to like steelworkers or one of the other unions that are available for machinists. Do you want to get into how the Electrical Workers Union becomes a part of Greenfield?
I mean, the first half of the story is that there is no story. Labor history is essentially the history of organized labor, and there was no organized labor in Greenfield until 1941, which is a long time. And then they surprised everybody that they did not organize with a craft union, which is where machinists organize a union for machinists, and it excludes everybody else who works in the plant. So that's really the big story, is that they opted to affiliate with a CIO union, which believed in what they called industrial unionism, which means everybody's in the union.
Because the AFL and CIO, as I learned from the podcast, which you can hear this weekend on NEPM at Swords Point, they were at odds with who they would allow in. Women, people of color, all that sort of thing is what was at odds between, let's say, AFL and CIO, as we hear them put together so frequently now. That's what they were odds about back then?
That's very much what they were at odds about. Yeah. The motto of the CIO was to organize the unorganized. Essentially, the unwanted children, as they put it. The workers that the AFL, frankly, wasn't interested in organizing.
We're speaking with Tom Goldscheider and Ian Koss, who are father and son, but are also the co-creators of a new radio documentary called At Swords Point, which you can hear this weekend on NEPM, and that you'll be able to stream where podcasts are available, right next to Ian's Peabody-nominated Big Dig podcast. A big part of this, and I think that people in our area would like to go to this place, is the Greenfield Museum of our Industrial Heritage. I love the long name of it, and I love the quirky nature of that museum. Talk about your partnership with them in creating this story.
Have you been?
I have been.
Okay.
I have not.
Well,
we have to go. We'll make it a field trip. We'll have to go.
I know
we
can go and
Yes.
we can just go for the show. And,
Yeah, that
like,
would that would be fun.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, it's a great museum. I highly recommend everybody visit. I believe they're open Saturdays, and they're always open by appointment. I was really very lucky to meet those union organizers that I referred to that are in the show, Dave Cohen and Judy Atkins. But then I was also very fortunate to meet Jim Terrapane from the Museum of our Industrial Heritage, who himself is a lifelong, highly skilled machinist, who then became interested in the history. And they now have a museum that's in the oldest mill in Franklin County. It's a beautiful site right on the river. And he has an archive. And that's where a lot of my research came out of. And he really opened that world to me, the importance of the machine tool industry, and in particular the tap and die, and just, the industrial history of Greenfield.
And as your radio documentary does, the museum as well shows you the import of and how far a reach Greenfield Tap and Die had in manufacturing. There was a part of me listening to it that thought, oh, I didn't really know I should blame Greenfield for the fact that we're destroying ourselves through these machines that have polluted our world. However,
Yes.
Positive and negative with every technology, I guess, including
We have
tap and die.
a peculiar vantage point in 2024.
I think so, too.
Hindsight, as they say.
Yeah.
After the World War II, you have these incredibly powerful, incredibly wealthy corporations that are literally sitting on top of the world. The United States just dominated manufacturing globally, but they woke up in bed next to these labor unions that they had to live with, and they didn't like that. That's pretty much what the story is here, is the Red Scare was really used as a deliberate act to divide and weaken that labor movement, which it effectively did. They particularly targeted unions like the UE.
We live in an area where a resurgence of unions has started to pop up. I think the first Trader Joe's in the United States in Hadley was unionizing, despite how that may be continuing to go. Tell us what the EU and this period of time with the Red Scare and Greenfield Tap and Die might have as a lesson for a resurgence of a union movement in this country.
Well, first of all, is UE. A lot of people.
Oh, yeah, I keep
make
saying
that
the EU. UE.
That's a different organization
Yeah, right.
entirely.
The thing that really drew me to the UE is that it's a democratic union. It really reminded me a lot of the New England town meeting, where traditionally in New England the towns are very autonomous and run themselves and are independent. And that's the way the UE was structured. The locals were really very self-contained, and they were run by the workers themselves. And it was a very empowering experience, and it was also uncorruptible. There was no Jimmy Hoffa in the UE. It was too localized, and it was too transparent. And that's, I think, the lesson that we can draw now. And that's exactly what Sean Fain is doing at UAW. He's turning the pages back and going back to the roots of the UAW, which was what they call a rank-and-file union. Not where you negotiate a contract behind closed doors and then present it to the workers. The people who you're representing are very much involved.
Did your experience as a farrier draw you to this story at all?
Well, I sort of opted out of the work world. I decided a long time ago I didn't want a boss. I don't know if I really count here. My wife, Suzanne Love, she is a nurse in the ER at Franklin Medical Center, I think.
Bay State Franklin.
Bay State Medical,
yes.
yeah. And she is very involved in her union. And so I've gotten to know a lot of people in her union, the MNA, the Massachusetts Nurses Association, and they are like the UE, a rank-and-file union. So I think that influenced my thinking more. I mean, I was briefly a member of the UAW when I was a grad student at UMass, but that was my only personal affiliation. I think Ian is taken after me in that way, that he's also an indie.
You're your own union of one.
Freelancer.
Well, Ian.
But there's parts of the story that I find myself thinking about a lot. And, we referenced before that Tom is my dad. There's sort of a generational aspect to this project where I feel like for my generation, we grew up in this world where organized labor had already been greatly diminished. And there's just so much lost knowledge in history about how union organizing works, what a union is for, where they come from. And so for me, as I look around, my wife was part of a union vote just a couple weeks ago. She's an academic worker. I know people who are organizing at Starbucks. I see this, resurgence of interest in organized labor. And also just there's so much that our generation doesn't know. There's certainly that I didn't know. And so for me, this documentary is a great opportunity to go back to that not so distant past when labor represented something very different in American politics and life.
Ian, did you notice any parallels at Swords Point to your work with The Big Dig or other documentaries that you've done recently?
Certainly in terms of the craft piece of it, these are big, sweeping historical stories. And there's always the challenge of trying to find, the human stories within that and try to draw the listener through that. So in that sense, they feel very much related.
Ian Koss is the Peabody-nominated creator of the Big Dig podcast, who has co-created with his father this radio documentary called At Sword's Point from historian Tom Goldscheider. It's available for you to listen to on the radio this Saturday.
Immediately after the Fabulous 413.
Yeah, Saturday, May 4th at noon, and then again Sunday at 3 p.m., and it's also going to be available as a podcast.
You can also read about it, and there's pictures up on the NEPM website now at nepm.org/swordspoint.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for joining us on this International Labor Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For this both uplifting and incredibly, depressing story.
Yeah.
More uplifting, we hope.
Yes. More local history later in the show when we talk with local historians Cliff McCarthy and Nicholas Ayeda about the local lessons we can learn at History Fest happening at Westfield State this weekend.
But up next, how a global musical community has descended upon the Granite State at the behest of the State Department, and how they're coming down the mountain to bring their music to Bombyx in Florence this Sunday.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, homegrown in Hatfield, Massachusetts, and providing energy savings for their customers for over 10 years. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
OneBeat is the gathering place for the musical leaders of the 21st century, an incubator for music-based social entrepreneurship where innovative musicians from around the world launch collaborative projects designed to make a positive impact on local and global communities.
Working with U.S. embassies, alumni, and major cultural institutions in more than 40 countries, OneBeat artist entrepreneurs are launching projects large and small in every region of the world.
Twice each year, the program selects a residency location in a different part of the country. The residency culminates in a few select performances in the region, and this spring and fall, OneBeat artists have been creating in New England at the Avalock Farm Music Institute in New Hampshire, and members of that ensemble, OneBeat 13, will perform at Bombyx in Florence this Sunday, May 5th.
We're joined by two of the artists in this year's cohort, as well as the program's director. Anthony Dembele Mito, aka Chekbet Mito, is a Kenyan MC, singer, percussionist, and beatboxer from Nairobi. Through his blend of rap, poetry, beatboxing, and music, he tells stories in English, Swahili, and Sheng.
Zere Azulbik is a vocalist from Kyrgyzstan and is not only a talented musician, but also a bold advocate for gender equality.
We are also joined by OneBeat's program director, Kyla Rose Smith, an acclaimed performer, violinist, and multimedia artist, best known for her work as a violinist and backing singer with Freshly Ground, South Africa's premier Afropop band. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. This is my first time hearing about this program, but it's absolutely fascinating in no small part because this was created by the State Department.
This is not the foreign policy that gets debated very frequently.
I know. Why would anybody debate this? This is amazing.
Right.
But Kyla, can you talk to the origins of the program?
Sure. So the wing of the State Department that runs this program, that introduced this program, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, is the same wing that does all kinds of exchange, both outside of the U.S. and in the U.S. Like the Fulbright, for example, is run by this same wing of the State Department. And since the late 1950s, they've been doing various kinds of cultural exchanges. The first of those being that some people may be familiar with was like the jazz ambassadors being sent to Europe in the late 1950s. That's a form of this program. There's a lot of outbound programs, a lot of sending American artists to other countries around the world, but there are few inbound programs, of which we are one, that bring international artists to the U.S. for this kind of exchange and meeting.
Let's start with you maybe then, Anthony, Checkmate Mito, who's a Kenyan MC. How did you hear about this program and what drew you to want to be a part of it?
I heard of it from a friend, who's also an artist back home in Nairobi. He's called Blinky Bill, and he's taken part in one of the OneBeat programs. And so just getting to see what the experience is like, from his perspective. And I don't know, I was just really drawn to just the possibility of meeting with all these different cultures and different spaces, and just creating work.
So I heard about OneBeat from a bunch of my friends, actually, because they knew that I was doing music. They just, whenever they saw the poster, the application form, they kept sending it to me and trying to convince me to try it out. I didn't know what it was. And then I read about it, and I mean, I thought it was amazing and I applied, and I'm so happy that I'm here. It's just, yeah, it feels out of this world. The whole connection with people from different countries, and yeah, it's just amazing.
How long do you have to come up with material before you start showing it around?
We have like 2 weeks, but I think, I mean, at least from my experience, like we were already jamming from the moment we just landed. I think everybody was just ready to do something, and that was beautiful to experience.
So are all the works that you'll be performing at Bombyx this weekend original and created out of this? Or are there through lines culturally that you're pulling from and like essentially adapting as covers to play all together?
Most of the folks are doing really original stuff. I mean, so far we've been jamming, as Anthony said, from the moment that we landed. And I personally think that every piece deserves to be heard in front of the public. But yeah, original or traditional pieces, it's always going to be a symbiosis of sound. And I think it's not just one thing, it's several at the same time.
This cohort, OneBeat 13, is actually like, it's a large number of people. Are you all going to be at each concert that gets done for this particular tour? Or do you break out into ensemble sections?
The US program is always 25 artists, but the way that's curated across shows is like different combinations. So it's not like you're seeing 25 people on stage together the whole time, but different combinations of those artists.
So if somebody wanted to like follow you like people used to do for the Grateful Dead, they'd get a different combination of folks and different.
Oh no,
works.
they'd be following 35 people touring the country.
I mean, there's something appealing about that.
Send them our way after this.
And the Bombyx show this Sunday, is this the first one after the residency's been through? So like your debut performance as this new ensemble?
It kind of is. We do a small show here at Avaloq for the local community on Friday, the 3rd, but Bombyx is certainly like the first official tour show of the residency.
And it's happening this Sunday at Bombyx in Florence. We're talking with some of the folks behind OneBeat, which is this U.S. State Department Educational and Cultural Affairs Office ensemble of musicians from all over the globe who've been working in New Hampshire and are now going to tour kind of starting here in Florence.
Kyla, we mentioned that like some of the alumni of this program are starting similar programs all over the world. How does the program here stay connected with what its alumni are doing all over the world?
The organization that I represent, Found Sound Nation, we are the producers and implementers of OneBeat. We kind of design the program and run it in partnership with the State Department. And as part of that, there's a growing alumni network. So the program's been running for 12 years. And it's not just this US program. We do an abroad program. We have a virtual residency. We have an alumni network now of over 600 people who've been through the program. And it's a really important part of what we see as a really valuable part of like building the kind of infrastructure and the network for those alumni, for them to both stay connected to one another and like allow for this residency just to be the beginning of something, just to be the beginning of seeding these ideas of like music as social practice. And over the year, we engage with alumni in various ways. We also offer a seed granting program to folks who might have ideas for socially engaged projects in their countries that we fund. We have an institute where we bring folks back to the US to kind of incubate larger project ideas. So it's sort of it's an ongoing engagement. Like once you've entered into this community, we really value the sort of building and strengthening of that community beyond this like 3 weeks that we spend together.
Found Sound Nation has also done work with Bang on a Can and Bang on a Can Foundation. How is the work that they or you have done with that organization different from what ends up happening with OneBeat?
So Found Sound Nation came out of Bang on a Can. Our 3 founding members were residents at the Bang on a Can Summer Institute, which happens at Mass MoCA. It's kind of where they met. And some of the ideas that happen at that residency, although that's like more of a new music classical residency, some of those ideas of collaboration and like bringing artists from maybe different communities together is what seeded some of what went into the designing of OneBeat, and also what we continue to do as Found Sound Nation. We call them kind of our parent organization that Fountain Nation grew out of.
That's amazing. And that's Kyla Rose Smith, who is the program director of OneBeat. OneBeat is going to be performing at Bombyx in Florence this Sunday after their residency in New Hampshire. I'm sure that Kyrgyzstan and Kenya are different in many ways from New Hampshire. So what have your impressions been of New England? Zere, we'll start with you from Kyrgyzstan.
Well, this is my first time in the US, and to be honest with you, everything just seems like it came out of a movie. I look everywhere and I see Twilight, I see any like American drama, especially the flags on the houses. Really, like that's a real thing, and I have seen it with my eyes.
Do you mean Twilight the vampire movie, or did you mean Twilight? I thought you meant Twilight the actual
Twilight
time of
the
day.
vampire movie.
I think she
No,
definitely...
but we went hiking yesterday, and we saw some beautiful views, beautiful forests, and that's where I got the Twilight.
That's amazing. Look out, because we do actually have vampires in New England, so be careful. What about you, Anthony, who's originally from Nairobi? Tell us what your impressions have been of New Hampshire and soon to be New England writ large.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as Zeria says, like we also get like a lot of information from movies, and yesterday when we took the hike, like also I got like the first time to actually touch snow. I've never touched snow.
Wow.
At this many years that I have existed on this planet, I have not touched snow until yesterday, and it felt kind of nice.
That's amazing.
To do it. It was a bit cold, but it was kind of nice.
Yeah, it shouldn't be here this late in the year.
Well, it depends on where you are in New Hampshire. If you're
That's
up in the
true. If you're up in
mountains,
the mountains,
it actually
then
is
that
good
makes
that it's
sense.
still there, I
Yes,
think. Yeah.
true. In the program, Anthony and Zere, are there things that have happened in these collaborations that you think you're going to take with you in your process later on for creating music?
Oh, for sure. I mean, just even hearing what everyone has to say with their music, I am even more convinced now in the idea that you can just be your own authentic self, speak your own language, and play the music that you really want to play. There is no need for anything other than that. And that alone on itself is enough, and you don't have to try to make everyone understand what you're trying to do. Just be sure in your idea and in yourself, really inspired by everyone.
And I think also just being such a big group of artists, like there's so many energies that are coming into play, every single time we come together and sit, we're all in different moods, different spaces. And so different levels of practice as well, so like there's so many energies and little lessons coming into play as well. I think for me, like we've already been here for 1 week. I think one of the biggest takeaways from the past week was like we had this session with Ben Lamar Gay, and it was just, for me, it was like a very different approach to sound making, producing sound. And it just kind of took me into a whole new world of creative expression. So I'm definitely going to carry that into my music, going forward.
The main incubator is in New Hampshire this year, but are there other OneBeat associated like community efforts that are happening in New England or like Western Mass?
Oh, interesting question. While we're on tour, we actually do a bunch of like engagements with the artists. So for example, I think we're doing something at a music school in the area, maybe in Springfield. On Monday, we're going up to Dartmouth. We're doing a bunch of sessions with students up in Dartmouth. Then we go to Portland and we're going to do some engagement. We're going to a contra dance. We might teach some other dances. So that kind of stuff happens during the program. But year round, the sort of work that is done is very much done in many countries around the world by these incredible artists, from folks who are like building music schools from the ground up, like brick and mortar schools in remote areas of Pakistan, or like people who are doing sort of environmental awareness projects in Brazil. There's someone who's done a whole sound museum, like an experiential museum of the Amazon rainforest, but just through the medium of sound. Like there's really like such an incredible host of things that these artists are doing. And you can visit our website, onebeat.org, the number onebeat.org, and a lot of that stuff lives there if people want to check that out.
Is there anything that people who are curious about your ensemble should know before coming to your concert at Bombyx on May the 5th?
You just need to come and see for yourself. Like, just come. That's it.
Yeah, and I would say like whatever it is that you will find in any of these spaces, like if you come to the show, like it's going to be beautiful. That's a guarantee, and it's definitely going to be worth your time.
It makes me proud of the U.S. State Department that we do things like this every once in a while, creating these cultural crossroads globally. And for us, lucky to be happening in New England with the residency of OneBeat and the first performance outside of the residency coming to Bombyx in Florence this Sunday. Been joined by OneBeat's program director, Kyla Rose Smith, as well as two of the residents from this particular residency, Anthony Dembele Mido, a.k.a. Checkmate Mido from Nairobi, and Zere Asolbek from Kyrgyzstan. Thank you for coming to our part of the world, for bringing your music to our part of the world, for opening our minds to all different parts of the world, and for coming to our little sliver of the world this Sunday in Florence.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Up next, Star Wars nerds have their conventions, and it may also be Free Comic Book Day, but this May the 4th, history nerds will rule the day at Pioneer Valley History Fest at Westfield State.
Local historian Cliff McCarthy and Professor Nicholas Aida will tell us all about it next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
If people who love fantasy and fiction can have their Comic-Cons, people who love history should be able to have their History Fest. And History Fest Pioneer Valley, quote, our homespun history conference is happening Saturday, May 4th at Parenzo Hall. That's not the one where the mafia came and changed all the locks overnight, right? That's a different hall.
That's a different hall.
Right. But this one is at Westfield State University, and we are joined by the Chair of History and Philosophy at Westfield State, Nicholas Aida, as well as our friend Cliff McCarthy, who is an archivist at the Springfield Museums, but is also the Vice President of the Pioneer Valley History Network.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's our pleasure.
How long has History Fest been going?
Oh, this is our first year in this format. We did similar events. The Pioneer Valley History Network did similar events pre-COVID. So this is our first one back in 5 years. And it's really a reboot because we're now partnered with a new partner at Westfield State University. And that's given us way more opportunities and excitement to draw in some of the student body over there. So we're excited about the reboot.
But is this just for students, or is this for anybody who's interested in
No, this
in
is
history?
a gathering of local history enthusiasts, including local historians and public history professionals and genealogists and preservationists and academic historians. We really wanted to open the door wide for anybody who's interested. In our world, the local history world is very siloed. Academic historians don't talk to the public historians and the people working in the museums, and the preservationists don't talk to either of them, and the genealogists don't talk to any of them either. So we really wanted to bring everybody together in one space at one time.
And here they will talk to each other.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That's a positive.
And that's Nicholas Aida from Westfield. You are going to be talking, speaking of kind of, I guess, more practical history.
Sure.
I think something that Khaleesi will be interested in, living in a historic neighborhood, about challenges in caring for municipally owned historic properties.
Yes.
Yeah, ongoing struggles.
Yeah, I have two slots basically that I'm kind of presenting in, and one I'm sort of caretaker for, but they each deal with different kinds of challenges. The municipally owned property, in our case, is a one-room schoolhouse in the Wyben district of Westfield. It is owned by the city. It was owned a long time ago, peripherally owned by Westfield State when it was the normal school. It used to be the rural regional training school, basically. So they would send the teachers who were going to work in these rural spaces out to this location and served the kids who lived in that neighborhood. And then around 1910 or so, sometime around World War I, it became the city property. And it remained as a schoolroom until 1938. Then it kind of shifted to the school district's ownership. People sort of lost track of who actually owned it. People in Wyben thought maybe they owned it, but it was given from the school district back to the city at some point. And I'm a member of the Westfield Historical Commission as well. And so it's one of the things that we've been trying to take care of is how do we refurbish this property when we don't have a budget line? The city is interested in the abstract, but not interested in the monetary. So we've been fortunate that we have had a study done on the property. We've been able to use some Community Preservation Act money to sort of shore up and keep animals out. And now we're recently granted a bit more funds so that we can really preserve the envelope of the building and then start to get in there to reopen it, because our idea is to make it a temporary space where students can come visit. But that is, a decade away. So, part of my purpose in that talk is really to discuss, how do you do it when the city doesn't want to pay for it and you're technically not allowed to do things in certain ways because it's a city-owned property. So we have to figure out, how do we pay people fairly? How do we preserve the historic nature of the building? My point in my presentation is to plea for all these folks who Cliff's bringing together to tell me, what do I do?
It's not more of a talk, it's more of a question.
There'll be probably about a 10-minute talk with about 30 to 40 minutes of please help me is what I'm really hoping for.
Well, you, Nicholas Aida, are the chair of history and philosophy at Westfield.
Correct.
So I guess one question might be, why? Why should, if the city doesn't want to get involved in it, there's lead paint, if it's a very expensive project, why preserve it?
Right, and that's part of the presentation as well. So in our city, it's the only one left that hasn't been refurbished into something else. There aren't a lot of them in the area that are still standing. Many of the ones that do were moved. So for example, obviously at Sturbridge Village, there's a one-room schoolhouse that was moved there physically. The town I grew up in, Sudbury, Massachusetts, there was one moved there by Henry Ford sometime in the early part of the 20th century. That's sort of an unrealistic vision of what the school was like. So our thought is to get it more like what it looked like. So it was a green and white building, mostly because white was the cheapest paint, and get it back to that look, and then also get students thinking about, well, how did it work? How do you get educated with multiple ages and multiple groups of people in a space with more collaborative learning, and really to expose families and the local community to how these school systems worked. So that's a little bit of the why.
That is Nicholas Aida, the chair of history and philosophy at Westfield, who will be part of History Fest, the homespun history conference happening for the first time in this fashion, Saturday, May 4th at Parenzo Hall, Westfield State University. We're also joined by Cliff McCarthy, who is the vice president of the Pioneer Valley History Network.
So why would Westfield State pair with the Pioneer Valley History Network to produce this? I know that you're as far as I know, the only institution in Western Mass that produces a history journal that's local, the Massachusetts History Journal, which, full disclosure, we subscribe to because it's full of fun things.
Yes.
Right.
But why partner with a local historical group to bring this to the public?
We have a couple of reasons. One of them is the journal, of course. The Historical Journal of Massachusetts is, as you pointed out, one of the few to publish in the area. It started in 1972, originally just focused on Western Massachusetts, and then eventually realized, well, maybe we should talk about all of Massachusetts. That journal celebrated its 50th anniversary recently, and there's been a long-time connection with Cliff through a variety of spaces. Certainly the chief editor currently, they're co-editors right now, but Kristen Clayton-Ruiz and Mara Dodge. Mara's had a long relationship with Cliff. We've had students who've interned with Cliff who now got jobs there, So, our department has had a long relationship with Cliff, and the journal has been at a couple of these events over the years. Another factor was we've had an interest in trying to host some kind of conference. About 10 years ago, we hosted the New England Historical Association meeting, and we just had gotten away from hosting events, and we thought, well, what could we do? So Mara had contacted me and mentioned that Cliff was interested in working with us, and President Thompson was also very interested in getting the university out into hosting these kinds of events. And it doesn't have to be always history, but for us, this was a perfect kind of match. And then, as Cliff pointed out, trying to build a relationship too with our students and get them involved. So we've got only one student presenter this year. We're hoping that we will continue this and encourage particularly our juniors and seniors to take the research that they're doing in their courses, and if they do a local topic, bring it up.
From the Historical Society perspective, Most of the historical societies in the area are volunteer run, and those volunteers are aging. And it's really a priority for most of the organizations that I see as part of the network to reach out to younger people. It was really, when we had the opportunity to partner with Westfield State, it was like, oh yeah, this works. This serves that purpose as well.
And the event is called History Fest Pioneer Valley, and it's about all sorts of local history, including Leo Labonte talking about 250 years of industrial powerhouses of South Hadley and the mills, etc. And like Coachella, trying to reach out to the kids, it's got a festival schedule. We're like, you can't go to all of it.
No.
You know, you got to pick stuff and in the different sessions.
Every festival has hard choices.
Yes, and music too, which is good. There will be entertainment by the ne'er-do-wells.
I will say this one is not as hot.
That's Coachella.
And it's easier to get water.
And Lana Del Rey won't be there.
No.
As far as we know. There's actually a guy named Bob Drinkwater who will be presenting Keeping
correct.
Memory Alive in Western Mass, preview of a regional guide to gravestone carvers and their work, which is actually Lana Del Rey's new album title. Cliff, you're going to be talking about a topic that we talked about last time you were on the show, which is the rescue of Angeline Palmer, which was a dramatic rescue out of Amherst, where surreptitiously taken out of town by family members that she knows so that she didn't get sold into slavery. Incredible story that we've talked about before. What's another story or person or presenter that you're particularly excited about at this History Fest happening Saturday, May 4th?
There's a lot of buzz about the bootleg queen of Springfield's South End.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Pascalina Albano. During Prohibition, she was the...
Wait, is she related to the former mayor, Mike Albano? No comment.
No comment. Come to the session and you'll find out.
But tell us more.
Yeah, she inherited from her husband, who got offed, the head of a organized crime network that was providing bootleg liquor. Justin Cassio, the presenter on that, has done a great job, very well researched, and very courageous in his presentation. Lots of names you will recognize from the Springfield area. But there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, we're talking about people, some famous and some not so famous, like Calvin Coolidge and Johnny Appleseed. People know those names. But then there's also John Andrew Jackson, who was a self-liberated former slave who, in his travels, crossed paths with Harriet Beecher Stowe and became one of the inspirations for Uncle Tom's Cabin. We'll talk about rich people like Helen Starrow, who created Starrowton Village over in West Springfield by the Big E. And John Irving, not the writer John Irving, but the man who the town of Irving was named after.
That's
who was
E.R.V.
One of the richest people in Massachusetts. But, I mean, the topics are amazing. We'll have the railroad industry, the whip industry of Westfield. Yeah. There's 2 presentations on early medicine in the Valley. We'll talk about the Cold War. There's even a murder mystery on top of everything.
Going to do it dinner theater style. And that's for the next year's conference.
That's next year's project.
It's all just a little bit of history.
Up next, we'll hear about the keynote address at History Fest and about more of the fascinating local figures that you can learn about at the conference this weekend.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. We're talking History Fest Pioneer Valley, the homespun history conference happening at Westfield State this Saturday.
And we are joined by Nicholas Aeta, Chair of History and Philosophy at Westfield State University, and by Cliff McCarthy, Archivist at the Springfield Museums and Vice President of the Pioneer Valley History Network.
The keynote address is given by Joe Carvalho, who is a historian and author and the former director at the Springfield Museums. He's talking about the 200th anniversary of the Springfield Republican, which in his talk will encompass a great deal of Western Mass history all up and down the valley. So I look forward to that very much.
Yeah, another one that we're connected with, or I'm connected with more directly, is an important topic for just outside of the valley, so over the Housatonic Valley, in looking at Sheffield. I've been working as the project director on a Sheffield Historical Society research long-term project, essentially looking at African-American life in Sheffield and connecting it to the other regional communities. So New York, just right over the border, Connecticut over the southern border, and then looking at, well, what drew some of these individuals into this community, and then how did they become property owners. So that presentation is going to pick a couple of different keystone stories, but one of the most fascinating connects backwards into Blandford, and that's the history of Jethro Jones, who was a Southeast Massachusetts guy who also lived in Worcester, who served in the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War, and as a free person of color was an unusual individual in being an early property owner up in Blandford. And we are blessed that we've got one of the researchers is his great 3 greats, 5 greats, whatever, niece.
Oh, nice.
Who is connecting us to what happened to his children after the 1820s, and they moved to Sheffield, and what their life is like. They moved to Sheffield, Great Barrington, and Pittsfield. One of those grandchildren will end up serving in the American Civil War, and his gravestone, we're having a memorial reinterment of the stone, not William Jones himself, but rather of the stone, which was knocked over in a very narcoleptic kind of car accident moment for somebody in February of 23. William Jones, he joined the 54th Massachusetts Regiment at the age of 45. So this was an unusual age. A lot of the American soldiers in that war were about 26, 27 years old. And he joined with 2 nephews and survived the war and went on to be one of the important members of the Grand Army of the Republic, the sort of fraternal veterans organization afterwards. So, that presentation is going to focus a little bit on Jethro's legacy, not only as a landowner and a veteran, but also as a really well-respected tool maker, somebody whose tools are around in a variety of locations, including Colonial Williamsburg and elsewhere. There are a number of different projects that have been looking at these communities through the Connecticut Valley and elsewhere and looking at, where are these individuals, whether it's Native people, African Americans, or other individuals who haven't really been part of these historical societies' stories, and so bring that stuff forward.
Creating the Voltron of local history by all of its disparate parts.
Just no Jaguars.
But you could dress up like Voltron because it's like a Comic-Con
They're
for
lions.
history, at History Fest.
They're lions until you get to St. Seiya, and I should not know this.
See?
You're right. They are lions. Sorry. You can dress up. Absolutely.
It is May the 4th, right?
Oh, yeah, right. I don't know if that's historical or not. That's more of a Comic-Con.
It's historical. It's just in a different galaxy.
That's true. A long time ago.
Correct.
In a galaxy
far away.
Correct.
Right now, History Fest is just a collaboration between Pioneer Valley History Society and Westfield State. Is the hope that in the future, other historical societies from around New England, or at least Massachusetts, will come and join in and support and be a part of it?
Well, they do actively. One of the goals for this project is to keep History Fest as cheap as possible and to make it available to anyone who wants to be a part of this. So in that regard, we've tried to parse together ways of funding the project, and Westfield has been particularly good at helping us use their facilities in an inexpensive way. If we had more sponsors, people who wanted to step up and sponsor different aspects of the event, we would be pleased to do that. But mostly this is the kind of event that is grassroots. It's participatory. We want people to come, enjoy the day, and then get excited about coming next year and doing a presentation. It's about what people's passions are. The people who give the best presentations are the ones who are so passionate about what they're doing that they can't hold back. They want to put it all out there for people.
It's happening this Saturday, May 4th, at Westfield State University. It's History Fest Pioneer Valley, our homespun history conference, the first ever in this fashion, but not the first of many, we hope, at Parenzo Hall at Westfield State. Cliff McCarthy from the Pioneer Valley History Network, and Nicholas Aida, the Chair of History and Philosophy at Westfield. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure.
Well, Khalees Smith, We're going on spring break.
We're going on spring break, Monty. Why are we going on spring break?
Oh, because we need it.
Well, there's that too. You're also not going to be in the country.
Yeah, I'm going to go to Spain. My wife is a professor at Smith, and she's going to be investigating all of the study abroad program in Cordoba, Spain.
That's so fun.
My goal will be to bring back to the Fabulous 413
tinned fish.
Tinned fish for you and for Kara, who works here as well, but also maybe some conversations with Smithies over in España.
Yes, about the things that they were expecting and the things that they got surprised by, and like
what they miss about Northampton, that kind of thing, maybe?
If there's anything they miss about Northampton, I don't know. Like, I feel like if I were in Cordoba, I might, like, not miss it very much.
Well, you might. But we have all sorts of great shows coming up for you.
I miss not having to use an adapter for all of my electronics.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget to bring that.
We better look into that,
Yes,
actually.
you absolutely should. Do not forget to bring an adapter. They don't use the same, like, voltage.
Oh, dear. I thought that was the case. I know that was the case when I was in India, but I didn't know that was going to be the case in Spain.
It's the same case in Europe, for sure. Like, I'm glad I reminded you of this.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, my goodness.
Hopefully they have it in the duty-free. Well, I'm Monty Belmonte.
And I'm Cleve Smith, and you'll still have fun, Fabulous 413 shows to listen to. They just will be a little distant.